Besser wissen, der Podcast von golem.de. Hello, my name is Martin Wolf and I am the podcast. That's how we start. Agent, commissary, delegate, representative, I don't know. Usually I start with, Hallo, mein Name ist Martin Wolf und ich bin der Podcastbeauftragte von golem.de. But now we are doing this podcast in English. And I don't even know what my position would be if I would say it in English. And I'm now sitting in my office with Eugene Bolshakov. Eugene, we met at VCFB, which is like the Vintage Computing Festival Berlin, where I saw you with a Soviet small computer, like a home computer. Eugene, first, where did you come from and how did you get to own this computer?
I was born and grew up in Uzbekistan. At that time, it was Uzbek SSR, so I was born in the Soviet Union. And this computer I ordered, but I had a Soviet home computer, another one, when I was a kid. When I was around 9, it was 1991, and I was interested in that, and my mom got me this computer. So I grew up with those computers. There were no community, or I didn't know about that, so I was alone, but that was something to start. And if I didn't have it, I wouldn't work as a IT specialist now.
That's a story that's often how it starts. You see something, you see this computer and you think, okay, I should do something. So what could you do when you had this computer in your early age?
I just could program on BASIC. Most of those, I think all of those or most of those home computers, they have BASIC inside. If you just turn it on, it runs BASIC and you can program on BASIC. BASIC was, I think, the only one language on those computers. The second one was assembler, but of course assembler is very complicated for beginners. And usually we start from BASIC. We program on BASIC, we learn how to program, we learn how to use computer. There were some games on the tape which I could load from the tape recorder, and it was like a very long story. You need to load them for 4 minutes or even longer. And then I could play some games, but I'm a person who didn't like playing. I liked creating, I liked programming. So that's what I was doing on this computer and what people usually were doing on that home computers.
We'll come to the exact model and what's the story behind it later. But now, when I imagine the ex-Soviet Union in 91, this is like a hard time. I mean, whenever I see pictures from them or hear stories from the 90s in Russia, it always was a very like bleak time for the normal people. I mean, some people really got very rich, but the rest, they were like, it was desperate times. How did you experience that?
That's true. In Uzbekistan, I lived in Tashkent, and Tashkent is a capital. And in Uzbekistan, it was a bit easier with food because they could grow something there. They could, like, the earth gave us food and fruits and stuff like that. But people were losing jobs. People were like, some people had to go for this shopping to China and bring stuff and then get money. It was hard. But in some places, maybe in Russia, were far from cities, like a Russian countryside, it was much harder. There it was like more or less, I couldn't say okay, but like not so bad.
But it's still, if you read from the Russians, they always they have a special name for these 90s. What they say, do they say the rough 90s, the wild 90s? I don't know. They have like a special name for this, I think.
In Russian, it would be lihiye, but maybe the translation would be rough or wild.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, and that was because some people were very poor and some people started making that money on this, and they were like shooting on streets, no law, and that's why it's called like this.
Mm. And also, we could, if we could do this podcast in Russian, it would be very short, because I could say, Меня зовут Martin Wolf, я живу на улице Вoristraße. I know that день Rождения is birthday.
Yes.
And I know, the other word I know is Dostoprimečatnosti, because everybody who learned Russian has, this is the only word they know. If they don't know anything, they know this.
That's true, that everyone who learned Russian somewhere outside, that's maybe what you learned and everyone learned.
Yeah, we did. And it's a bit sad that that the only thing that stuck with that is this. But this is because we learned the language like from books. There was no real, we didn't talk to anyone in Russian. We didn't write letters or anything, so we had no communication. It was very abstract. The whole thing was very abstract.
That was the same with English in Soviet Union and post-Soviet countries. We also learned it from books and we could read something, but we couldn't talk. It was maybe the same as you had, but English started to be like common language, very international, and of course people who needed to like even work, and when the country got a bit open, then people needed to speak at least a little English to understand people coming from other places and to a cultural technical exchange. So I had to have special courses for that, and also thank you to my partner because she once banned Russian in our house. We were speaking only English. That was hard, that was harsh, but it worked.
That's very great. And I mean, in the end, now we can sit here and speak English. I didn't have English in school until 1990, until the war came down. We only had Russian before that, and we started with English later. But I found English to be much, much easier. Also, I learned a lot of English from computers, from reading the text in the demos and in the games. I had a very good amount of computer game English, which made it easier. So now we go back before the wall came down and before Soviet Russia went down the drain. And there was a combine, which is like you say if I say something wrong, Eugene, okay? Like a combine is like, it's like a brand, but it also is like a conglomerate of different companies or branches which produce different things under one name. And then they are all like in the communist country, they are all like, they're in the combine. So Electronica was one of these combines in the Soviet Union. In Eastern Germany, we had Robotron, which were producing computers. They were producing radios, like, I don't know, watches? No, but clocks. I know that they produce clocks and everything, like quite a lot of electronic stuff. And also Electronica did the same in Russia, didn't they?
They did. Electronica was, I think that was just a name. Most of devices, any devices, not only computers, they started producing computers much later. Most of devices, they were TVs, they were radios, they were clocks, also hand-raised watches and music things. That was a name, and different factories were producing them because everything belonged to the government, and they just didn't put a name, and they even had I found it quite recently, they had a naming convention, how to call devices. There was an Electronica, then there was a number, and the first digit meant this, the second digit meant this, and they even had it. That was, I think, most of things produced in Soviet Union called Electronica. There was also a factory called VEF in Riga. Now it's closed. And they were producing more. They produced some radios, they produced telephones and some other devices for home, but they had their own name, VEF. But mostly Electronica and VEF were, I think, two common names, and Electronica was like everything.
Yeah, and it even came to Eastern Germany, because I remember vividly that the Soviet soldiers which were stationed here during the Cold War, they brought stuff from Russia and sold it in second-hand shops because they got more money, because it was stuff that people didn't have here. And for example, they had LCD games, like small handheld games with LCD screens on it, which could like beep, and there were a watch as well and all that. And Eastern Germany didn't have something like that, but it came from Russia and they sold it, and you could buy it in a second-hand store for 100 mark, which was a lot of money for a kid back then. But it was like probably, I don't know what is a small amount of money then. I like 30 rubles or something. I mean, it was much, much cheaper in the Soviet Union, but they brought it here and it sold it. Yeah, it was called Electronica.
It was also called Electronica, and I had that thing in 1987.
Yeah.
And that was like really for kids to play like we now use phones. We could play it during commuting to school, for example.
Yeah.
It was not safe because our parents said that not to bring it to school. They hit you and they steal it from you. But that was a nice thing just to play for a kid. Yeah, and it really had an LCD. Actually, it was a replica. I don't remember which exact thing.
No, Nintendo.
Nintendo.
Yeah,
Nintendo.
It's yeah, but it had different characters. It had the rabbit and the wolf, which were like these are the main characters. You know, everybody knew the cartoons with the rabbit and the wolf, and it had like.
I think I had one with the rabbit and the wolf. Yeah.
So 1987, I would have been very envious of you because we didn't have this.
I don't know where my mom found it. Maybe they were already cheaper, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably, yeah. So they had, I don't have one of these, but what I do have is a Pong game from Electronica. It's called Turnier, which, you know, it's like a Pong console. It's got only one chip. And if I opened it and the main board, it looks terrible. It looks terrible. It's all soldered, but not in a good way. You know, it's like all cables and all that. It looks very, very, very socialist. Like socialist electronics. Well, we come to if the BK has the same stuff, but I have this one, and I also have a Electronica clock radio. No, not a radio clock, which a friend and colleague gave me. And yeah, so I have at least two devices, and you have the BK0010. So we already established that the first numbers in that probably have something to do with the device class. But what is BK? What does it stand for?
That's for BK. That number is a bit different because that naming convention came later, and 0010 is a binary 2. The next model was 0011, and that's a binary 3. Why they didn't put binary 1, I don't know.
But it's a clever naming scheme.
Yeah, BK is бытовой computer. That means бытовой, it's like for household. So that's not a home. It's not I can say home computer, but it's a household computer. So that computer was made for using at home. That's why they call it like this.
I have the question, could you as a Soviet household just buy one of those computers?
It's much more complicated. They were made for households, and they were in Electronica shops. So that electronic devices were sold in a special Electronica shops with the same name. But of course, it's not like now. It was at a communist way. You had to order it and wait. And in some places, if they're far or not so... In big cities, it was shorter waiting time. In farther places, it was longer waiting time. It could be even a year. And then they order it, and you get it. About the price, so it's also you had to pay for it. About the price, it was 600 rubles. Now it says nothing because in the communist country, the currency was different, but it's better to calculate for the salaries. It's maybe 3.5 monthly engineer salaries. So to buy this, the person had to pay 3.5 their monthly income.
I am tempted to look up what a Volga did cost, like the car, because that was a great. I mean, that was like a luxury car in Russia.
Volga was really expensive. I know that Lada My grandpa had it, and I remember that he said it was 5,000 rubles, and it's around 25 monthly incomes. It's like 2 years you need to work, don't eat, and then you can get Lada. Then you could get Lada, but Volga was maybe it was even 10,000, so it's 4 years.
We had them as taxi cars here.
Oh, really?
In Eastern Germany, there were the taxi cars.
This
seemed very, very luxurious.
Yeah, they were mostly used as a taxi cars. They were not used so much just by people. So people didn't buy them because they were expensive.
Which brings us back to the home computer, which was expensive. But did people buy? I mean, obviously you had one, so someone must have bought them. Or where did they go? Did they go to educational, like in schools, or where could you find them?
People bought them. People who are interested. So that was not for everyone, because the computer was not so easy to use because of this tape recorder. You needed to connect the tape recorder. That was not for zero level, and usually people who got them, they were maybe like I can say educated, but also interested in computers. They were engineers. They were like also radio amateurs. Mostly the community came from people who were making radio devices. So they needed to understand something. But those people, they just they ordered them, they waited, they paid this money, they may like keep some money if they wanted to buy the computer for some time, and they got it. Also, those computers were sent to schools, because why did they start producing computers? Because they wanted to computerize the country, and they wanted people to learn how to use computers. And they decided to make the subject informatics in school. It was 1984. And after that, they started sending computers to school. They started organizing computer classes in schools, in universities, in college. We can say the college, so that the place where people were, the place where people got a professional education. So they mostly, it also depended on the place. In some places far from civilization, like very far places, they didn't have computers, but they tried to send them to universities, to the bigger cities, to colleges, and to schools. So where people first time saw the computer. I also saw the computer first time in the school. My school got that computer class. I don't remember when. I started school in 1988. I think it was already there, but they got it just a year ago, or maybe even the same year when I started. But I was a kid and I was interested, and then my mom and me came to the teacher, and she asked me if I can come to to try something with the computer. So the people who could not get them, they first used computers in schools.
So that's also giving us a time frame. So I'm looking at a document that you presented at VCFB, which I photographed, so I can always like cheat and look ahead what is coming. So they started developing it in the early 80s, like 83, and then they introduced them in 85, which, I mean, the Soviet Union, even more than Russia, was a very, very big country. So until it comes like to the last corner, it takes a while. Also, because it's so big, the numbers have to be much higher than, let's say, Eastern Germany, where if you have like 10,000 computers, it's like quite a lot. But if you have 10,000 computers in Soviet Russia, it's like nothing. So they produced quite a lot of these devices.
Actually not. They produced, I don't remember exact number, but it's also somewhere in that.
It says here, that's what I mean. It's over 125,000.
I think it's
162,000.
around
Yeah.
100, 100.
That sounds like a lot to me.
It's a lot, but the country had 250 million people living there. But that number is only for Electronica BK computers, but there were other ones. But they were not so... They were a bit less popular, but there were factories producing only them. And I tried to find more accurate numbers, but I couldn't. So we can't say exact amount of computers produced now. But if even we double it, if we say that they were 160,000 of BKs and 160,000 of other ones, that could be 320. And that's for that big country, it's really not so much.
Okay, so I'm probably a bit off with that, because I just read that the Eastern German home computers that they had, like the KC85, and I was like, and I had these numbers in my head that were under 50,000 pieces of them were produced. So of course it sounded like much if I see 162, but of course you're right. If there's, it's nothing compared to the number of people that should be catered with these computers, especially if they're in schools and all that.
But they started producing another one for schools, that UKNC, which I had also. It's not working. Mine is not working. And they produced 300,000 of those, but those were sent only to schools. So then they started, when they made it, I think those ones were for homes and those ones were for schools. So that's how they maybe fixed this problem, and more schools got computers.
Okay.
So that they tried, and not only them were in schools, they were different models of those computers, and some of them were in other schools, so they were not fully compatible. Like each school could have their own computers, each school could have their own software, or teachers could write this software, could make this software at their school, and they were not compatible, and like the teaching process was quite complicated, because I read about that they were textbooks, but there were different textbooks for different computers, and which computers had a particular school.
So I heard this, someone said this, and it stuck with me, that in the 80s with computers, in the West, in the US, sometimes the state acted like, or they acted like socialists, like communists, with sharing all this, with the networks, with the university connecting, with all having one standard, and that the Soviets behaved like capitalists, because they were always there were several different models that you could buy, and they were in opposition to each other. They were in competition. The companies were in competition with each other to one-up themselves or to have these computers, and that it was like it's like the opposite of what you would expect it to be, because if you look from the outside, you would say, okay, this is a communist country and they have a centralized economy. Everything is centralized. There's someone is saying all this. So why don't they centralize this? Why don't they say this is our computer? But they didn't. And everybody seemed to build their own computers.
They didn't, and not everyone. There were a couple of known models. I think there were less in 80s. They were really few models of computers. There were some computers based on Intel 8080, 8-bit computers, and VK 16-bit computers. But later when already, I think it was 1987, when they allowed cooperatives, when they allowed a kind of a private small companies or so, and they started making clones of everything, and that small company, I mean, like 3 people in the room, they could solder their own computer. But of course, what they started from the DIY thing. They printed the schematic, they printed everything, and they said, you can make the computer. That was I think that was the very first thing how people, and that of course needed a lot of understanding how to make the computer. And also they needed to order the chips, and it was hard to order them also like waiting and stuff like that. And
they were notorious for being faulty. You didn't order one. You ordered
Of
like
course.
a pack because you never knew what you got.
of course,
Yeah.
and there were many faulty. I think on the RAM, I had in another computer. They say it's like no, it's ROM. They say the half of them are faulty. If you need two, you need to order at least 4, but better to order 10, and the 2 will work. like this, and there were really a lot of faulty things. But because they didn't want to throw them out, they tried to use them. Even they're faulty. They tried to use halves of them. For example, if there's a RAM which is 16K, but if it's faulty, if 8K is working, then I can put it as 8K. So how they did. Some of those computers, I think, have those faulty things.
But that was a usual thing to do in the West too. When they knew they were faulty, they also did that. But as we are at the technical aspect, so now what do we have? We have this Electronica BK0010. Yeah, not underscore, but 01. Now the CPU is, as you just said, it is 16-bit. What is this? What kind of CPU is this?
That's a Soviet replica of PDP-11 compatible CPU. So they chose the PDP-11 architecture because it's a CPU, it's a chip. I think it's closer to LSI-11. It's closer to the smaller PDP computers, but the architecture is PDP-11. It doesn't have a floating point commands. But as I remember, it has a full set of commands which original PDP-11, I think 003 has. Maybe it has even 1 or 2 more. It doesn't have multiplication, division, and it doesn't have a floating point commands. So that's a PDP-11, the not the lowest one, I can say, but maybe the lower one. And it doesn't have a memory, memory management. So it just has a flat memory addressing. The bigger, larger PDPs, I think PDP-11, 40, 70, they have memory management, that memory different modes like a user mode, kernel mode, like we say now, but this one, it of course doesn't have.
But it's clocked at 3 megahertz, which isn't too shabby for the 80s.
Yeah, and it's quite good. And that PDP-11 architecture, it's very simple, and maybe why they chose it.
So they copied the CPU from the West. But you told me, where VCFB, that the CPU is in this computer twice. Why is it?
No, in this computer, there is one CPU. 2 CPUs are in that school computer, UKNC.
Yeah.
And that's a very peculiar configuration they invented. They put one CPU for computing, so that the main CPU, which like runs the program, running on the computer, and the second CPU is managing the peripheral devices. Like it's managing video, it's managing keyboard, it's managing, I think, also a timer or something else. So that configuration is very weird. Everyone finds it weird. And the programming for this, it's quite complicated. And I actually read that they are connected only via the parallel port chip. So you can you can exchange the data. They even don't seem to have the same bus. They have each of the CPUs has their own bus. It's compatible with QBus from DEC, but they have this chip which allows that CPU to communicate. So where 2 buses kind of meet, and that's also a ULA.
So is it like? Can I imagine it like this? And so the small ones, like the BK computers, they are in the classroom, and the teacher has one of those bigger computers with these 2 CPUs, or is this completely different?
It could work like this, but mostly when they invented this UKNC, that computer with 2 CPUs, the whole class had them, even the teacher and the students. But the teacher had a floppy controller and a printer. And sometimes I think that's it. And that network, so they were connected to a network, kind of a network. And the teacher computer had that main network controller which could control all those student computers. So, but I remember maybe there was a configuration when the teacher had this UKNC with, it's also school computer with 2 CPUs, and students had this. But mostly they put that DVK, that bigger sister of that computer which was used for organizations.
Ah, okay. So I mixed them a bit up because the whole timeline, and also if you look from the outside into Russian computers, it's quite complicated because there is not many sources in the English-speaking web about all of this, at least that I know of. Do you have any hints? Because we could put it in the show notes. So if you have something that you could share, like where we could find some infos, that would be great. I would put that in show notes.
I think I can share. I made my own timeline. I tried to collect this information and made my own timeline when it started. And it started, there is an urban legend. I can also tell it when it started. And then I can send it and you can share it. Because they're really different, because they have different computers and they were produced in parallel. For example, this BK10 was produced from 85 until 1990. Then they started BK11. UKNC, that school computer, they started producing it in 87 and until later, until 95 even. And DVK, those bigger organization computers, they had also different models, and they were produced, some models in parallel. It also depended on the factory. So there was a DVK 1, 2, 3, and even 4. And at 4, I think it had already, I don't remember about the amount of CPUs, but it had that memory management and the different modes and the multitasking. So it was quite powerful thing. So that's why the timeline is so complicated. And then I just talked about this PDP-11 compatible computers, because other computers, they had the different timelines. And there was mostly, I think, one computer produced from 1980 something until the Soviet Union was broken.
So what's the urban legend?
The urban legend that the Soviet military found a sank American submarine, and there were 2 PDP-8 computers on the board, and they got them, scraped it, and then made a copy. That's an urban. No one knows if it's true or false. That's why I say that's a legend. How they started with PDP architecture.
I heard on the VCFB, you told me another legend, and that one is about the Soviet computers, that parts of them had a significant amount of gold in them. So they were all scrapped, so there's none left.
That's not a legend. Unfortunately, that's completely true. That's not a legend, because for this, no one knows if they really found that submarine or not. And that was confidential, classified. But this is not a legend. This computer, it doesn't have so much gold.
So the BK doesn't have
BK have, okay. But it still has capacitors made of palladium.
Okay.
For example, if we cut all capacitors from this computer, there will be 2 or 2.5 grams of palladium, and that of course can be sold. But DVK, that computer made for organizations, they really had a lot of gold. One of them, I think the DVK2, so 1 and 2, they were the most valuable. 3 and 4, they had less. I think they already learned how to produce cheaper things, and they started to put cheaper things into them. But for example, I especially found that DVK2, it had the board and that cables and that stuff, 72 grams of gold, 120 grams of silver, and some platinum and palladium. And of course, the case was made from iron, and the cables I mean, the connecting cables were made from copper. And of course, you can imagine how much money you can get if you scrape this computer. And I think the whole village could eat for a month or so.
So that's a Soviet computer for you, which is even worth its money after decades, you know? And in the West, I mean, look at your phone. It's not going to be worth anything in 3 years, but if you had such a computer, it might even be worth more than when you bought it. So
even if it's not working.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
I don't know about the PDP, original PDP. I think they also have some gold. They made those, I think, for those connectors on the board that, how to say, those connectors were made of gold. So they, even not the whole connector, but the gold was on the top to reduce the resistance, to prevent the corrosion. So why they used gold. And palladium, I think it was used for capacitors because it's that capaciting material which worked well. And it's still working well. Those palladium capacitors, they are very, very good. And they work for 40 years or even more.
So now we went on a wild tangent, but that's par for the course on this podcast. So right now we are still at the technical specifications. What's the RAM on this computer?
This one has 32K of RAM, just 32K, and 32K of ROM. They put BASIC, and BASIC was quite big, and BASIC takes 3 ROM chips, and it's 24K. And the monitor, like a base monitor system, it's 8K, and only 32K of RAM is available. And that's, of course, not enough for programs. That was the bigger, I think that was one of the biggest disadvantage of this computer. For example, those Intel 8080 computers, they just had a small monitor and BASIC, and they could have like 50, the whole RAM and ROM together, 64K. And if they put just small things, they could have more RAM. But this one, it has only 32K.
We got BASIC, but is it Russian BASIC? Do I write my stuff? I mean, I can see the characters on the keyboard, and it's Cyrillic, and it's also not Cyrillic. It's both.
It's both, and the BASIC is the same as everyone knows. With the normal basic commands, so English-based BASIC. They learned the same BASIC, and also they had vocal from DEC, and they learned the same vocal, and even the assembler mnemonics, they are the same as DEC has. So there are no Russian. It's not completely true. There was a Russian, like a computer language based on the Russian, but I think that was just for kids, and it was not so popular. So they didn't do this.
But why would they print the keys on the keyboard, which is terrible, by the way? I tried it. It's very hard to type. I mean, that is a bit to be expected from a Soviet keyboard, that you really have to, push the buttons. But why would they print the keys with Cyrillic when all you do is write in Latin?
I think because that the Soviet computer, it supports Russian, and they were also, how to say, that computer is not only for programming. They were also making other stuff on it. I'm not talking about games now, but for example, if you work with documents, if you work with some accounting that you need, so that it has a Russian character set inside, it's like I forgot how it's called, but yeah, so it has 2 languages. It has 2 character sets. I mean, English and Russian, Latin and Russian. That's why they put both to the keyboard, so that you could type in Russian if you need to. And of course, not all people, actually almost no people knew English in that way to have the computer completely in English. And that's also a problem, that the software which this computer has, it's mostly in Russian. So it has the Russian messages on the screen, and if a person who uses this computer doesn't understand a little Russian, that it's hard to use.
So if you can't read Cyrillic, you're out of luck.
Yeah.
So the peripherals, you can obviously, you said it already, you have cassettes, so it's a data, but you don't have a data set. You just use a normal cassette player.
Yeah, that was, because that was a home computer, it was supposed to use the normal home cassette player, tape recorder, and the tapes like this, and the normal TV, which people use for watching, like TV programs. Some of those computers had just an antenna output, and you put a cable to an antenna, and this computer has a video output, RGB, and it was also not so easy because not all TVs had them, and on the TV people needed to solder to connect this computer. But the idea was that people just got this as this is a computer, so the board is inside and the keyboard and the power supply, and they didn't need anything else. They supposed to have the cassette player for listening to music, and they supposed to have a TV for watching, and they could use this computer with all of that.
I can imagine it with a VEF record. I don't know. VEF, you said they produced radios. I don't know if they produced tape.
I think they did. I think they did.
And then as a TV, you have the UNOST, which is a small, a very round, small black and white TV. I used to have one of those. So then you could watch it, and it's on the UNOS it would be black and white, but the computer can produce color?
This computer has 4 colors.
Wow.
It can produce color, but it has only 4 colors: red, green, blue, and black. So there is no white. If you turn on the color, if you switch to the color, but how to say switch? This computer has just that it has 2 separate outputs for black and white and color. On the black and white, letters will be white. On the color, the letters will be reddish green or red. So the red is the main color. That red is the color 1. I don't know why they didn't make white.
It cannot display yellow. So this computer, as it is, cannot display the flag of the Soviet Union? That would have been like a case for the Gulag for the engineers if that would have been 30 years before.
But, of course, there is a life hack.
Okay.
If you there are some demos, and you can see it even on the demos. I usually show the demos and say, this computer has only 4 colors. And people don't believe this, because if you put the dot of red and the dot of blue, you will see violet. If you put the dot of red and the dot of green together, you will see like maybe kind of a yellowish color. And there are demos which really show many colors, but using only 4. They just put the dots together, and that's how it, on the demos it works. And even the games, some games use it, that life hack. But this one, it has only 4 colors, but the next one, 11, it had a palette switching. So each palette had 4 colors, but you could switch them, and the colors were, I think, hard coded. I think palette 1 was the same, and palette 2 had a kind of the color cyan and magenta, or I don't remember all of them, but there is a demo which shows all of them, and you could switch them, and really that was like a revolution of color. People could make the demos mostly the photographic quality.
As you're talking about demos, so there obviously was kind of a scene of people who produced software for that. I could imagine in the Soviet Union there was not a software distribution house and they were selling it in the shops, the software. Where did you get your software from then?
There were not distributing house, and there were no market. There were magazines, like paper magazines. When I think it was a bit later, it was already end of 80s and maybe 90s, and the first publications about computers were in the radio magazine. The magazine was made for radio amateurs who made radio devices, and before they organized the magazines about computers, they were they were putting that stuff to the radio magazines. And there were people who were making software at home, and they could send an ad to the magazine. I am making games. That the picture, like a black and white picture or just information. You can send me 5 rubles by post and you get the tape full of games. So that's how the software was distributed. Of course, there were, I can't say computer clubs, but maybe there were some interest clubs where people met and they also exchanged the software. But they were like people into computers, so they were all making something.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because nobody except for those people had a computer. I mean, if you had such a computer, you were determined to get something going.
Yes.
This is not something you should just, I mean, and if you see it in the West, you say, oh, I would love to have a computer for Christmas because all my friends have a computer. And maybe when Easter rolls around, you go like, okay, I don't use that computer anymore. I want to do something different. But in the Soviet Union or Eastern Bloc in general, because it was so scarce, you really had to want that. And if you do, you take care of getting software, getting you get to know people who also have it to share with them.
Yes, that's true. So that mostly people who really wanted to have this, they got this. And some people were using this, also engineers, also to make their thesis in the university. That's what those home computers were used for.
And as you said, there's a demo scene. Is there still a scene for these?
There is. They participate in the global demo scene. They send their demos to the bigger contests, even international, even if people don't have those computers, but they accept everything. And there is a Russian-speaking community, which it's a bit bigger than demo scene, but they also make demos. And they show those demos on the contests. I don't know if now it's harder to come here, to Europe, but I remember that people even came to Europe to show their demos, but usually they have their own demo parties to show demos. But for example, if I make a demo, I can bring this computer to a demo party in Berlin or in other city and show this demo.
And I also see that poet.net, which is like an online resource for the demo scene.
Yeah, you can search.
I'll put that in the show notes. There's pages upon pages of demos. And there's one from 2024, and it's called BK 3D Arena from Dmitry Pratsin.
That's a game.
That's a game. Okay.
That's a game, but it's there because it's a 3D game, like a very simple kind of Doom where you move and hit some enemies. The problem is that it's very small. It's only 8K, I think. I don't remember. I have it. I even played it. But the idea was the question which Dmitry asked himself, am I able to make a 3D game on the VK? I think that's the first. And that's not only one game produced in 2020s. There are some more games produced. For example, there's a clone of Pong. It's called Pong Charged. It's actually the new Pong, but it's for 2 people. You can connect 2 joysticks or you play with computer. That was just, I think, one game and this 3D arena and I think something else. Games, but people, in most cases, people make demos. The demo is beautiful. A demo you can show just you, and people can see what you could make in like 256 bytes.
Which is impressive all the way. And then, we're getting soonish. We're going to be at the end of this podcast. We could talk for hours because even right now you said like the joystick. I saw the joystick, and it actually looks like you would suppose a Soviet joystick would look like. I said terrible. This thing looks terrible. It doesn't look like fun at all. It's like a gray box with a small metal rod which has like a white ball on top. I don't know. Is it that?
It has a white ball. Right? It worked bad. because I actually fixed it. The problem was that thing with white ball, there was a 1 millimeter more plastic on the right side. When you turn the right, it was not enough to make a contact, and they just needed to cut this 1 millimeter of the plastic to make it working. And now it's working really well, and I can play games, even the modern games, with this joystick.
So that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to say there's a lot of more aspects to this than we could cover right here. But what we could say is that there is an emulator. That's what I wanted to get at. You can try this at home, and you should. There is an emulator. We'll link it in the show notes. So you can try the demos, you can try games, and you can look for software. Is that right?
That's right. There is even more than one. There are more, I think, even 4 emulators. That one, which is the best, it emulates really the best of, I think it also has a different models of those computers. It has a different floppy controllers, but it's in Russian. The interface is in Russian, and it's hard if you can't read Cyrillic. It's hard to get into it. There are more which are easier to use, and they are in English. And I particularly mention here the emulator for Android, which is really, really good too. It was made by Viktor Antonovich, I think. He's from Belarus. And it emulates really good on the phone. You can look into this at your phone, and it supports really a lot, and it's in English. So the interface is in English, but the software could be in Russian, and that could be hard. It can be just installed from the Google Store. I think it's called PKEMU, but we can put a link.
We'll put the link in the show notes. Now, the problem that I had, years ago, I looked into all of this Russian Soviet computer thing because I wanted to know more about how the history unfolded over there. And to all the listeners, if you are a bit confused by all the models and numbers and all that, imagine that. It's always the same. And imagine that on Russian. Right now we have it, thanks to you, Eugene, we have it in English. But if you want to look this up, it's very complicated because everything is in Russian. And even though you have the translation tools right now at your disposal, it's complicated anyway to make out, okay, which model was it, which factory was it produced in which city and all of that. So where I wanted to get at is I tried to actually buy one of these. I didn't want it to have an emulator. And that is very complicated in the West, isn't it?
It's quite complicated. Most of them, I think 90 or even more than 90% of them I understand that many of them were just destroyed. And I don't know, no one knows how many working computers are in the world, but more than 90% of them are in Russia, and it's not possible to get anything from Russia now. And I actually don't suggest to do this. There are some in Baltic countries because there was a factory in Šiauliai in Lithuania producing them. Maybe they have some. The factory is not working for a long time. I think it's closed since 90s, but they could have those computers. There are some on eBay. There are people who brought them from post-Soviet countries, also from Ukraine, and you can buy them. It's not super easy, and you could. I think it's not possible to find all models. So what that guy could bring, he brought, or maybe there was a computer class. They wanted to destroy those computers, but that guy paid them and got them. They're quite expensive here. I think the working one it can be more than 200 euros, and it's also the delivery. But people even get them. I know a guy in the US who got it from Slovakia. I don't know. I think he paid really quite a lot because of the delivery from the EU to the US. But yeah, that's hard to get them now.
And also, if you have one, it's not guaranteed to work. So, for example, the one that you brought into the office, which is looking very nice, actually, is not working because there is stuff in there that is prone to breaking, isn't it?
Good question. There is stuff there which is more into, but that actually was my fault because the keyboard, it has cables, and those cables were so old and they like got physically broken. And when I tried to fix them, there was a static electricity and I broke the keyboard controller, which is the ULA, and that ULAs are not produced for more than 30 years.
That's a proprietary piece of...
This computer has a proprietary ULAs, and I think all of those PDP-11 compatible computers, they have it. And if that thing is broken, it's hard to find them because they're not produced at all. And people who sell them, there are some people selling them, they sell leftovers, and they also can't be sure that that one you get is working. Of course, they are like honest people, and if it's not working, they return your money. But it's also hard to get them, and they're just... Of course, there is a FPGA project, but you need to also not only solder. So there is no like simple replica. That project is the guy from Ukraine. He reversed engineered them. He even cut the case to see the chip through the microscope.
Like on the microscope.
On the microscope, and then he, of course, there was some documentation from the factories how it works and from who made them. But if you need to make a replica, you need to make very, very, very close. You need to understand what's happening there. And that was really huge work. But it's only on the GitHub. So to make it working on this computer, you need not only to solder it, you need to put FPGA to kind of adapter and put the proper pins. And those pins are different for each of them. So you cannot make the universal one, which will work on every... So this one has two. This one has a keyboard controller and a display controller. So this display and memory. So it's like more... Like now we call it chipset, so that one. But another one, for example, that's cool one, UKNC, I think it has 6. And 3 are different. That's the next version of this ULA. And it's really... I actually don't know anyone who can sell them or get them.
Eugene Boljakov, thank you for coming here and for telling us about this. And also to people listening, so this is a completely new and uncharted, from our eyes, uncharted territory. So there's a lot of things you can do with this with community work and with people supporting or trying to find out more about these computers and to contact people who already have them. I think it's worth looking into, and I hope that there's coming more in like in English, or like websites that maybe make this more transparent to people, or even to try to find like ones.
Also, now people leave Russia more, and some of those people who work with computers, they leave even more. I mean, and maybe some of them bring that computers, and there will be more here, and maybe there will be a meetup here. One of well-known guys in the demo scene, he's now in Serbia, and I know he tries to show something there, and that's also like he's spreading this knowledge, and other people are spreading this knowledge. So that's also, I hope not all of them just will be destroyed for the gold.
So thanks again. And also, I mean, I could imagine to get back to the beginning of this podcast, I could imagine a community meeting of people who have electronica devices. You don't even have to have this computer. I mean, imagine a meetup somewhere in Europe where people meet who have electronica devices. I could come with the electronica Pong or with my clock, or someone else could come with a small LCD game, and everybody could share the electronica stuff, and we would have a nice, communist day. I don't know where I'm getting with that. So it's time to end this podcast. Eugene, thank you for visiting. Thank all of you for listening. And if you have topic suggestions and also critiques about my English, not about Eugene's, please send them to podcast@golem.de.